My wife Margot hasn't said my name in 7 years. We were told it was a stroke, a bad one, the kind that takes the woman and leaves the body behind. For 7 years I have shaved her chin, brushed her hair, and talked to a face that never talked back. Then last Tuesday our daughter drove us into Traverse City for a pre-surgery heart workup, and when Camille stepped into the hall to take a call from her office, the cardiologist got up, walked past me, and pushed the exam room door closed with her hip. She turned around and her face had gone the color of paper. "Mr. Hollis," she said, so quietly I had to lean in. "Who fills your wife's breathing medication?" I said. "My daughter did. She always had." The doctor's hand was shaking on the doorknob. "Then I need you to listen to me, and I need you to keep your face exactly the way it is right now. Do not let your wife go home in that woman's car." Before I could ask her what she meant, the handle turned under her fingers. Camille came back in smiling, apologizing about the office, and in her left hand, she was carrying the little blue case she carried everywhere, the one with Margot's nebulizer in it, and my heart stopped dead in my chest. My name is Raymond Hollis. I'm 71 years old. For 34 years I flew commercial aircraft, mostly out of Detroit and Minneapolis, and I finished my career teaching young pilots how to survive the worst day of their lives in a simulator. I spent my whole working life believing that if you check your instruments, follow your checklist, and never trust a feeling over a number, you'll get everybody home. I was wrong about exactly one thing. I never once thought to run a checklist on my own family. Before I tell you the rest of it, friend, do me a kindness. Tell me down in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I'm an old man in a quiet house, and it means more than you'd think to know somebody out there is sitting with me while I say this out loud. And if you've ever had to protect the person you love from the people you were supposed to be able to trust, hit that like button and stay with me. This story gets dark before it gets light. But it does get light, I promise you that. The examination room smelled like alcohol swabs and floor wax. Margot sat in her wheelchair beside me in the blue cardigan I dressed her in that morning, buttoned wrong, because my fingers aren't what they were. She was 69 years old. She had directed the high school choir in our town for 26 years, and there were grown men in that county who could still sing a 4-part harmony because of her. Now she stared at the corner of a poster about sodium intake, and her hands lay open in her lap like two things somebody had set down and forgotten. Dr. Priya Anand had ordered a full panel before they'd clear Margot for a gallbladder procedure. Blood work, a metabolic screen, the works more than anybody had bothered with in years. She'd been reading her monitor for 4 straight minutes without saying a word, and I'd watched her jaw tighten a little more with every line she scrolled. When Camille's phone had buzzed, my daughter had looked at the screen and sighed like a woman carrying the world. "Dad, it's the Cadillac facility. They can't find a chart." 2 minutes. She'd squeezed my shoulder, kissed her mother's hair, and stepped out. The second that door latched, Dr. Anand stopped being polite. "Your wife's blood is showing a compound that shouldn't be anywhere near her," she said. "It isn't a bronchodilator. It isn't in her chart. It's a sedative class that suppresses cognition, and the levels tell me it's been going in steadily for a long time. Years, not weeks." She glanced at the door and back at me. "I have to tell you something else, and I need you to hear it clearly. I filed a mandated report with Adult Protective Services this morning, before you came in. I did that because I'm required to and because I wanted to. But Mr. Hollis, your daughter holds your wife's healthcare proxy. She's listed as the reporting caregiver. That report is going to land on a desk, and it is going to sit there while somebody schedules a home visit. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Nobody is coming today. Nobody is coming this week." I sat there with my hands on my knees. Somewhere down the hall a phone rang twice and stopped. "Then what do?" I said. "You don't give her that treatment again," she said. "Not once. And you don't tell that woman I said a word to you. Because if she thinks you know, the next thing that happens is she moves your wife somewhere you can't reach her, and she has the paperwork to do it legally in an afternoon." Then the door opened, and my daughter came back in with the blue case in her hand. "All set," Camille said brightly. She set the case on the counter the way she'd done 1,000 times, in 1,000 rooms, in front of 1,000 people who thought she was the finest daughter in Michigan. "Mom's due at 4, so we should get on the road ahead of the weather." She looked at Dr. Anand with the warm, tired, professional smile of a woman in the caregiving business. "Anything I should know, doctor?" And Dr. Anand, God bless that woman for the rest of her days, smiled back and said the heart looked fine for her age, and she'd send the clearance to the surgical group. I want you to understand who my daughter is, friend. Because if you're picturing some obvious monster, you're picturing it wrong. Camille Hollis Draper is 42. She runs the administration side of a small hospice network with 3 locations along the bay. She wears cardigans in soft colors. She sends handwritten thank you notes to the nursing staff. When our church did the fundraiser for the Ellison boys' transplant, she organized it, and she cried at the podium, and every person in that fellowship hall told me I'd raised a saint. Her husband, Dorian Draper, is 45 and owns a wellness studio in town, infrared saunas, IV drips, supplements in amber bottles with Latin on the label. He calls me Pops. He has never once looked me in the eye for longer than a second and a half. 7 years ago, on a Sunday in October, they took Margot up to their place for what they called a care weekend, so I could get some rest. I'd been running myself into the ground. Margot had been having headaches and some blood pressure trouble, nothing anybody was frightened of. On Monday morning, Camille called me from the emergency department in Petoskey and told me my wife had collapsed in their kitchen. Massive event, they said. Global insult. When I got there, Margot was on a ventilator and my daughter was sitting in the hall with her makeup ruined, holding a cup of coffee she never drank. 2 weeks later, in a family conference room with fluorescent lights and a box of tissues on the table, Camille slid a folder across to me. Healthcare proxy, durable power of attorney, financial authority over the joint accounts and the 2 rental duplexes in Gaylord that were supposed to carry us through our 80s. Dad, you can't be making these calls at 4 in the morning after being awake for 30 hours, she said. Let me carry this part. You carry her. And friend, I signed every page without reading one of them. I want you to hear me say that plainly, because it's the thing I'll answer for. I was a man who had refused to push a throttle forward without a completed checklist for 3 decades, and I signed away my wife's life and my own on a laminate table because I was tired and because I loved my child. They moved us out to the lake house that winter, my folks' old place on Little Torch Lake, 11 miles of county road from anything, beautiful in July and buried alive from December to April. Camille said the quiet was better for Mom. She hired the aides. She arranged the deliveries. And somewhere in there my phone stopped ringing. My friends stopped visiting because the road was bad. And I woke up one day and realized the only adult conversations I'd had in 6 months had been with the 2 of them. The breathing treatment started that first spring. A post-stroke aspiration risk, Dorian explained, showing me a printout he'd made. His compounding pharmacy contact would prepare it, twice a day, morning and evening, through the nebulizer, and only ever by him or by Camille, because the dosing was delicate. He kept the ampules in a small locked steel cabinet mounted inside the pantry, and he carried the key on his ring next to his car fob. For 7 years, I stood in the doorway and watched my daughter hold a mask over my wife's face while the mist went in. And I thought, look how she loves her mother. The drive home from Traverse City took 50 minutes and I don't remember any of it. Sleet coming sideways, the wipers thumping, Camille talking about her sister-in-law's kitchen remodel. My hands were steady. 34 years of landing airplanes in weather taught my hands to be steady when the rest of me isn't. Halfway home, her phone rang on the console and Dorian's voice came up on the speaker. How'd the cardiac gal do, he said. Cleared her, Camille said. Good. Hey, Pops. You doing all right? You're quiet back there. Long morning, I said. You just let us handle the medical, he said. That's what we're for. And then, easy as anything, Camille, we should probably move that conversation about the Bayview transfer up. I talked to the intake director and she can hold a bed through Friday. But after that we lose it. Camille's eyes flicked to me in the mirror. We'll talk at home. Talk about what? I said. There was a pause with the wipers filling it. Dad. My daughter's voice went into the register she uses on the phone with grieving families. Bayview is a memory care residence in Kalamazoo. It's beautiful. They have a music therapy program. Dad, listen to me. You're 71 and you're lifting a grown woman 4 times a day, and last month you nearly went down on the ice with her. You're going to break a hip, and then who has her? Nobody wants this, but she needs a level of care we can't give her out on that lake. 400 miles. Kalamazoo is 400 miles from Little Torch Lake, and I don't drive at night anymore. When? I said. Friday, she said gently. We'd move her Friday. It was Tuesday afternoon. Understand what that meant, friend. It meant I had 72 hours, and after that my wife would be in a locked residence in a city I couldn't reach, and every fact about her care would go through the woman sitting in front of me. I made the appointment from the hardware store parking lot in Bel Air on Wednesday morning using the phone of a man named Curtis Vance, who has sold me nails for 20 years and who did not ask me one question when I told him I couldn't use my own. The elder law attorney's office was above a bakery in Petoskey. Her name was Frances Boyle. She was maybe 50, with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, and she listened to me for 11 minutes without interrupting once. Then she said the thing I hadn't let myself think. "Mr. Hollis, I can challenge that proxy. I can also petition for an emergency guardianship. I want to be honest with you about the timeline." She started counting on her fingers. Petition gets filed. Court appoints a guardian ad litem to interview everyone. Your daughter's attorney gets notice and responds. We need a capacity evaluation on you, because I promise you the first thing they will argue is that you're cognitively impaired and being manipulated. She put her hands flat on the desk. 6 to 8 weeks. In a good county with a light docket. And Mr. Hollis, the moment she's served with that petition, she knows. She has legal authority over your wife's placement until a judge says otherwise. She can move her that same day, and there's not a thing I can do about it before Monday. I looked out her window at the sleet coming down on the parked cars. So the law can help me in 2 months, I said. And I have 3 days. That's right, she said, which is why I'm going to ask you a question I don't normally ask a client. She took her glasses off. Do you have any way to prove what's in that medication? I drove home, and I did not go inside. I went around the county road to the third mailbox past the bend, where Ruth Okonkwo has lived alone since her husband passed. Ruth is 68. She worked 31 years as a hospital pharmacist in Grand Rapids before she retired up here, and for the last 2 winters my daughter had been telling me Ruth was becoming a nosy, difficult woman I shouldn't bother. She opened the door in a housecoat and took one look at me and said, "Ray, what happened?" I put the empty ampule I'd fished out of the kitchen trash on her table. I'd taken it Tuesday night, and I'd have taken it a lot sooner if I'd ever once thought to look. Ruth turned it under her kitchen light and got very quiet. "Where's the pharmacy label?" she said. "There isn't one." "Ray, there is always a label." She set it down. "There's a lot number and an initial here, handwritten. That's a compounding mark. This didn't come out of a licensed pharmacy with a patient name on it. Somebody made this in the back of a room." She read the abbreviation on the side twice, and I watched a professional woman's face change into something else. "This isn't a respiratory drug. I gave this class of medication for 31 years, and I never once gave it to a stroke patient. You give this to somebody, and they go still. They stop tracking. They stop forming memory." She looked up at me. "Ray, how long?" 7 years, I said. Ruth Okonkwo put both hands over her mouth and sat down in her own kitchen chair like her legs had quit. "Here is the part I need to tell you carefully, friend, because when I first told this to my grandson, he stopped me and asked why I let it go on 1 more hour. I didn't. I want that on the record. I never let another dose of that go into my wife. Wednesday night I went down the stairs at 2:10 in the morning. I know that house. My father framed the second floor himself in 1961, and I know which boards talk. I went down in my socks with a flashlight in my teeth and the little pick set I'd used for 40 years on the padlocks at hangars where the line boy had gone home with the key. The steel cabinet in the pantry took me 9 minutes. My hands were not steady that time. Inside were 11 ampules in a foam tray, a box of saline vials for flushing the equipment, and this is the part that put a cold hand on the back of my neck, a second tray in the back, unopened, with twice as many. A resupply. Somebody had ordered ahead. Somebody had a plan that ran well past Friday. I took 1 full ampule and put it in my bathrobe pocket. Then I took the saline vials, and one at a time, with a syringe and a hand that would not stop shaking, I emptied the 11 ampules into a mason jar and refilled every one of them with sterile saline and reseated the caps so they sat exactly the way they'd sat. I was on the last one when the kitchen light came on. Dorian's voice, thick with sleep, from 10 feet away on the other side of a pantry door I had left standing open 2 inches. "Camille, you up?" I stopped breathing. I have been in a cockpit with an engine on fire over Lake Erie, and I have never in my life been as frightened as I was standing in my own pantry in my bathrobe at 2:40 in the morning. He opened the refrigerator, poured something, stood there drinking it. 40 seconds. A minute. I could see the strip of light under the pantry door and the shadow of his feet crossing it, going away, coming back. He set the glass in the sink, and then he did the thing that nearly ended me. He walked to the pantry door and put his hand on it. He pushed it shut. That's all. He pushed it shut, thinking it had drifted open, and he went upstairs. I stood in the dark with 11 ampules of salt water in front of me for a long time before my legs would work. Thursday morning, I did the hardest acting of my life. I got down on the floor in the living room in front of my daughter and her husband, and I begged. I'd like to tell you it was all performance. It wasn't. When I said, please don't take her from this house, please don't put 400 miles between me and my wife, that was true. And my voice broke on it because it wanted to break. But I had a purpose. I needed them to look at me and see exactly what they'd been telling everyone they saw. A frail, sentimental old man with no cards left. Give me the weekend, I said. Let me have Saturday and Sunday. Let me sit with her in the house where we raised you. Camille, I am asking my daughter for 2 days. Camille knelt down and put her arms around me. I could smell her shampoo. She has used the same one since she was 19. Oh, Dad, she said into my shoulder. Of course. Monday. We'll go Monday. Over her back, Dorian was watching me. I made sure he saw an old man crying on a rug, and I watched him decide he'd won, the way you watch a man decide he doesn't need to check his instruments anymore. They gave me until Monday morning, which meant they gave me 4 days, and they'd already given me something they didn't know about, which was a locked cabinet full of salt water. She started coming back on Friday. I want to tell you about this the way it actually happened, because the movies get it wrong. It isn't a woman sitting up in bed. It's smaller, and it's stranger, and it's worse. Friday afternoon, I was reading the paper aloud to her the way I'd done every day for 7 years, mostly to hear a voice in the room, and I got to the part about the school millage vote, and Margot's eyes moved. They came off the window and they landed on my face, and they stayed there. Just stayed. 10 seconds. 15. And her hand, the left one, the one that had directed 100 concerts, came up off the blanket about 4 inches and dropped again. I said her name and I heard myself sound like a child. Friday night she made a sound, not a word, a note, 2 notes, low in her throat, and I knew them because I'd heard her hum them across a kitchen for 40 years while she made coffee. Saturday morning, Camille came into the bedroom with the mask and the machine, and I stood in the doorway with my heart going like a bird in a box, and my wife lay there and took a full treatment of sterile saline, and my daughter said, "There we go, Mama, all done," and stroked her hair. Saturday afternoon, Margot looked at Dorian when he came into the room, and she flinched. He saw it. I watched him see it. The color went out of his face, and he made an excuse and left. And 10 minutes later, I heard him on the deck, telling Camille something in a voice that was not the voice he used in the house. By Sunday, she could hold a pen. Not right hold. Her hand shook so hard the point tore the paper. I sat beside her with a legal pad on a cookie sheet across her lap, and I said, "Take your time, sweetheart. We've got all day. There's nobody here but me." She made 4 letters. It took her the better part of an hour, and they came out crooked and enormous like a first grader's. POBOX. Then, after resting a long while, 4 numbers. Friend, we had a post office box in Gaylord for 18 years when we owned the duplexes. I'd let it go, or I'd assumed I had. Turns out Margot had kept paying the $12 a year out of a little household account nobody had ever bothered to close, and she'd kept paying it for 7 years without ever knowing she was doing it because it came out automatic. Monday morning, before the sun was up, I drove to Gaylord in the dark with a key I'd found in a coffee can in the garage. There was a lot of junk mail in that box, and underneath it, at the bottom, there was a manila envelope with Margot's handwriting on the front, her own name, her own address at the box postmarked 7 years ago. October the 11th, the Friday before the care weekend, I sat in my truck in that parking lot with the heater running, and I opened my wife's letter to herself. Inside were 11 pages printed off a computer and a sheet of her stationery. The printouts were internal charting records from Camille's hospice network, medication administration logs, controlled substance reconciliation sheets, the paperwork that's supposed to account for every milligram of the strong stuff that goes into a dying person and every milligram that gets wasted and witnessed. Somebody had circled entries in green pen across 4 different facilities, going back 3 years before Margot's stroke. Waste entries, with 1 signature where there should have been 2. Quantities logged out for patients who, according to the same sheets, had died the previous week. My daughter had been running a diversion scheme out of hospices. Out of hospices, friend. Out of rooms where people go to die. And on the stationery, in my wife's beautiful, upright, choir director handwriting, "Ray, if you are reading this, it is because I could not make myself say it out loud to you, and I'm ashamed of that. Camille has been taking medication from her facilities, and I think selling it through Dorian's clinic. I found the reconciliation sheets in her car in August. I have asked her twice to stop and to turn herself in, and she has told me twice that I don't understand the business. On Saturday, I am going up there to tell her that if she has not called her board by the 1st of November, I will. I am mailing this because I am not entirely sure what she will do. I love you. I have always loved you. If something happens, do not let them tell you I was careless. I sat in that truck for 20 minutes, and I could not see out of my eyes. 7 years. 7 years of holding a spoon to her mouth. 7 years of my daughter standing at that bedside with a mask in her hand, saying, "There we go, Mama." My wife hadn't had a stroke in that kitchen. My wife had walked into her own daughter's house to give her one last chance to do the right thing, and she'd never walked back out of it. And every single day since then, that woman had been keeping her mother's mind switched off so the truth couldn't come back on. Then I drove to Petoskey, and I put that envelope on Frances Boyle's desk, and Frances Boyle picked up her telephone. They came from Margot at 7:10 on Monday evening, in the worst weather of the year. They came early, is the thing. They'd said Monday morning, and then Dorian had called Sunday night to say the transport company had a slot open Monday evening instead. And I said fine, and I hung up and I went out to the generator shed. There were headlights coming up my drive through the snow Camille's Tahoe, and behind it a white van with a medical transport logo on the door. 2 men got out of that van, and they were not aides. I've hired enough men in my life to know the difference between a caregiver and a body. Camille came in shaking snow off her coat with a clipboard under her arm, Dorian behind her. She looked at me standing at the bottom of the stairs in my flannel shirt with my hands loose at my sides. "Dad, we talked about this. You're not taking her," I said. Dorian moved up beside his wife and put his hands in his pockets. "Pops, don't do this to yourself. The paperwork's signed. The bed's paid for. You step aside now and you keep your dignity. There's a lot number handwritten on those ampules in my pantry," I said. The room changed. I have never in my life seen 2 faces go so still, so fast. "Dorian," Camille said quietly. "Don't," I said. "Don't go check. There's nothing in there but saline. Has been since Wednesday. That's why she's been looking at me, Camille. That's why she flinched when your husband walked in the room. Because your mother has been awake for 4 days." Dorian took 2 steps toward me and stopped, because I had not moved, and men like that don't know what to do with a man who doesn't move. "You crazy old bastard," he said. "You know what you just did? You know what 6 days off that does to her system? You could have killed her." "I called a pharmacist first," I said. "Something you never did." Camille's clipboard was shaking in her hand. And then, friend, my daughter's face came apart, and what was underneath it was somebody I had never met. "Do you have any idea what I have carried?" she said, and her voice was not soft anymore. It was flat and fast and full of contempt. She was going to burn my entire life down over a paperwork problem, her own daughter. "And you sat out here on this lake, and you let me handle everything, and you never asked one question, not one, in 7 years, because you didn't want to know. Don't you stand there and act like you weren't comfortable." "You're right," I said. "That's mine to carry, and I'll carry it till I'm dead. Now get out of my house." Dorian said, "Nobody's going anywhere," and he gestured at the 2 men in the doorway, and they came in and shut the door behind them. And I said the only thing I had left to say. "You forgot what I did for a living." Both of them looked at me. "I taught pilots how to handle the worst 10 minutes of their lives," I said. "The whole job is this. You assume it's going wrong, and you build the answer before you need it. I checked out of this house at 4:15 this afternoon, and I have been sitting in it ever since with a plan." I raised my left hand and unclipped my watch the Bulova Margot gave me when I made captain in '87, and set it down on the hall table, and it landed with a click that everybody in that room heard. "That's a transmitter," I said. "Frances Boyle put me together with a task force out of the Attorney General's healthcare fraud unit on Saturday morning, because it turns out 11 pages of falsified controlled substance records is the kind of thing that gets people to answer the phone on a weekend. They have had audio out of this house for 4 hours. They have your mother's letter, postmarked 7 years ago. They have an ampule, and they have Ruth Okonkwo's affidavit, and they have Dr. Anand's report. And about 90 seconds ago, they got the 2 of you explaining yourselves in my front hall." I looked at my daughter. "And the county road behind that van has been closed at the bend since 6 o'clock. I own the 200 feet of gravel your tires are sitting on. I called the plow contractor myself and had him windrow it 8 feet high. Nobody moved for maybe 3 seconds. Then the whole downstairs lit up blue. The two men in the doorway got their hands in the air before anybody outside said a word. Professional courtesy, I suppose. They knew the sound of that many vehicles. Dorian ran, actually ran, to the backslider, and stood there looking out at the snow and the lake and nowhere to go, with his hand flat on the glass. Camille sat down on the third stair. My daughter, in the house where she learned to walk, and put her face in her hands and did not make a sound. I went upstairs while they were bringing them out. I sat on the edge of the bed and I took my wife's hand. Margot's eyes came around to mine, slow, but they came. State police and the AG's investigators were in my kitchen until 4 in the morning. I made a pot of coffee at 2 and a young trooper thanked me, and I remember thinking he wasn't any older than Camille had been when she left for Michigan State. The medical part took months. They moved Margot to a rehabilitation hospital in Grand Rapids, a real one, that I chose, with a neurologist who let me sit in on every consultation and gave me her direct line. What they found was that the original event 7 years ago had been real, but it had not been a spontaneous stroke. It had been a hypertensive crisis brought on by a massive dose of something my wife was never prescribed, given in my daughter's kitchen on a Saturday afternoon. The damage from that was permanent, some of it. She has weakness on the right side she'll always have. But the 7 years of fog on top of it, the silence, the blank face, the thing everyone, including me, called gone that was chemical, and that came off. Camille pleaded out 14 months later on the fraud counts and went to trial on the rest. The jury was out 6 hours. Attempted murder, felony assault, and 11 counts related to the diversion. She's serving 35 to life at Huron Valley. Dorian took a deal and testified and got 19 years, and his clinic's license was pulled inside a week. The compounding contact he used lost everything and is doing 5. Adult Protective Services closed the file Dr. Anand opened, by the way. It was still marked pending initial contact when the arrests happened. 10 days. That's how long that report sat. People ask me if I visit. I've gone twice. Both times I sat in a room with cinder block walls and my daughter told me it was Margot's fault for going through her car. And both times I drove home and didn't feel anything at all, which frightens me more than being angry did. I'm her father. I'll be her father the day I die. But I know now what she is, and I'm not going to spend the years I have left holding a mask over my own face. I want to give you something, friend, because you sat here through all of that, and you deserve better than a story. Don't ever sign a power of attorney in a hospital hallway. Not when you're exhausted, not when you're grieving, not when the person handing it to you has your last name. Take it to a lawyer who works for you. Get a copy. Know that you can revoke it, and know it takes weeks, so do it before you're desperate. Keep one doctor who does not know your family. One. Somebody whose loyalty runs to you and nobody else. Get copies of your own medical records once a year and put them in a box in your own closet. It costs almost nothing, and it is the only version nobody else can edit. And if there's an old man or an old woman on your road who used to come around and doesn't anymore, and somebody's explained to you why go knock on the door anyway. Ruth Okonkwo was told for 2 years that I didn't want visitors. If she'd believed it, my wife would have died in a locked memory care unit in Kalamazoo, and everybody would have signed the paperwork and gone to lunch. Last Tuesday morning I made coffee. I've made it the same way since 1979, too strong. Splash of cream. In the yellow mug she bought at a craft fair in Charlevoix. Margot was in the chair by the window with the blanket over her knees, watching the ice go out on the lake. She still needs help with the cup, mostly. She still loses words and gets frustrated, and there are afternoons she's tired in a way that scares me. But she took the mug in both hands, and she drank, and she made a face. And then my wife looked out at the water and hummed 8 or 9 bars of a hymn she used to conduct on Easter Sunday, off-key, in a rough little voice, the way you'd hum if you were nobody special standing at a kitchen sink. I stood there in my own kitchen holding a dish towel and I cried like I have not cried since I was a boy. We're selling the lake house in the spring. We found a little place down in Florida, near Ruth's sister, where the road stays open all year, and there's a choir at the church 3 blocks over that takes anybody who shows up. Margot can't direct anymore. She says she'd like to sit in the back and sing the alto line badly, and that's exactly what we're going to do. I lost a daughter, friend. I lost her a long time before I found out. And there's a hole in the middle of my life shaped exactly like the little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder in the truck. But I got my wife back. After 7 years of talking to a face that couldn't answer, she told me my coffee was too strong. I'd sign for that trade every single day for the rest of my life.